It's time for a real test for Ohio State. Yeah, whatever we call it. Preseason, non-conference, tune-ups, whatever. Forget about that. It's time for real questions and real answers. Ohio State and Notre Dame on Saturday night. But before we get to that point, it is a Tuesday in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, and Bill Landis has some questions to kick off the podcast daily. Bill, what is on your mind for the Buckeyes?
Are you going to win?
That's a great one. All right, we're done.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there, right? Like, I love when we get into these matchup games, and I think this is one, because you can talk more about like real football stuff. I think, like, you know, are you going to really overanalyze the matchups when Ohio State's playing Youngstown State? Probably not. It's more about Ohio State, as Ryan Day says, as much as that does come off as coach speak, that is true in those games. This is not that. This is like, Where do you think you have the biggest advantage over Notre Dame? How might they exploit that? Like, at least that's what we talk about. Is Ryan Day going to stand up at the podium and tell us all those things? Of course not. I think it's more maybe like philosophical stuff with Ryan Day, I think. And I think maybe the chief question on everyone's mind is like, how is he approaching this? Because, you know, you think back to the press conferences last year after they lost to Michigan and were getting ready to play Georgia and like got that new life, and they were really excited to embrace that. Ryan Day was using words like bold and fearless going into that game. And maybe there's a question along those lines, but I'm also just kind of curious if he starts going down that road himself, because I think that will tell us about the way that he's viewing this kind of matchup on Saturday night.
All right. Well, we are viewing this week just a little bit differently as well on the podcast and on the daily. Doug Lesmerises is in South Bend, or was in South Bend, whenever we might have recorded this for your Tuesday morning viewing pleasure. We will bring him in just a minute to talk about what's going on with the Irish. But I do think I took note, Bill, that Emeka Egbuka, after the game on Saturday night, was using that talent equated slogan. That they were turning the page already. They were looking forward to it, and they, you know, the fact that the team is using the coach's words usually means that they're listening and paying attention. So clearly Ohio State has already shifted its mindset by Saturday night, even maybe before that, based on the way Ryan Day and the Buckeyes talked on Saturday night about attacking practice differently Sunday through Thursday, and then best Fridays in football and all that it had been on a different level than the first 2 weeks. And we had talked about it and suspected that might be the case, that Ohio State wasn't treating Indiana and Youngstown State as an opportunity to prove it's a national title contender. And we could argue about whether that was, you know, fair or unfair, right or wrong. Clearly, that's the way that they did it. And they were able to flip a switch last week and do the kind of things that I think we all expected that they would. What does that mean for Saturday? I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, I think it's fine to use your non-conference schedule and include Indiana in that as a ramp up the things. I just don't want it to come off as an excuse for them not playing that well.
Sure,
because they weren't. They could have been more efficient in those games. Should have been more efficient in those games, and they weren't. But to their credit, like they were seemingly challenged with what was the word that Ryan Day kept saying? Ratchet it up. We're going to ratchet it up this week, and they definitely did. So if they responded to that call, that's awesome. And they're going to have to respond to a different call this week. I think maybe that in some way is a bit encouraging, that perhaps Ryan Day does maybe have his finger on the pulse of his team going into a major, it's still a non-conference, but it might as well be a marquee conference game on the road at Notre Dame. So they do seem like they're in a good headspace for this. I wanted to I was wondering what the spread would be, right? Because I think that's something that Ohio State can use. They are a slight favorite going into this game, but I still think there might be something there for Ohio State to like play a little bit of the underdog card. If the view on this game is like Notre Dame has been kind of firing on all cylinders from the start of the season, and Ohio State finally hit that stride last week, but maybe there's still some lingering questions there. So maybe Ohio State can harness that a little bit and use it against Notre Dame.
All right, that's scratching the surface of what's on Bill's mind. We'll get more of his questions later on in the show, but we're going to try something a little bit different, and we're going to have our field reporter, Doug Lesmerises from South Bend, jump in here and tell us what's going on with Marcus Freeman and Ohio State's opponents getting ready for Saturday night in prime time. So we're going to loop him in, and we're going to be right back. All right, Doug Lesmerises, live-ish on a Tuesday morning in South Bend, Indiana. It looks beautiful there, Doug. How is it?
It's lovely. It's a perfect day, and the forecast for Saturday is 80 and sunny, so it should be just like this when it matters.
That's perfect. All right, so first of all, what is it like to infiltrate an opponent press conference? I know that's a bit of a joke, a little bit of tongue-in-cheek. None of us are part of Ohio State's program, but we cover that team specifically here, and I don't know what's going on here, but we're hopping around with the Bills.
That was me.
I'm losing my mind.
I was making us fit into the boxes. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you just saw us play a weird shell game. So my apologies to Burn, but I want it to look good.
It does look great. So, like, when somebody from out of town pops into a press conference, like, who's this guy? What's he doing here? What was it like to pop in at Notre Dame on Monday?
Well, I kept emailing them to make sure that I'd be let in. So I finally got the go-ahead on Monday morning, about an hour and a half before the news conference, as I was eating 2 Amish donuts for my breakfast at a little bakery. So it's interesting. And actually, we're kind of working on something here at the podcast about covering college football. So I was counting the people there, 14 reporters, 4 camera people, and me. So, like, they kind of noticed that I was there. But very gracious. It's just a very different vibe. They do their news conference in the football stadium, not at their football building. So we were in Notre Dame Stadium for it, but it was almost like much more like a library feel to the news conference. Very kind of quiet and serious, as opposed to the raucous party we have in the Ohio State team room every Tuesday.
18 reporters for Notre Dame? That sounds amazing.
It's just a different world. Everybody, like, very politely got their 2 or 3 questions. We went around. Marcus Freeman talked for about 25 minutes, and then they don't normally do players on Monday, but they did bring Sam Hartman, the quarterback, in for about 15. So again, just a very different vibe for Ohio State. This is a huge program. These schools are 250 miles apart. They've each been playing football for 130 years. They are both defining programs in college football, but they're not quite the same.
Doug, is that Touchdown Jesus behind you?
Yeah, that's Touchdown Jesus. This is where College Game Day will be set up this weekend here on the quad in front of Touchdown Jesus. And then if I turn, I know not everybody's like intimately familiar with the geography of Notre Dame. That's Notre Dame Stadium right there. So that's the Rockne Gate. There's a Newt Rockne statue right there. They have statues of Frank Leahy, Eric Parsegian, Dan Devine, a bunch of coaches around the stadium. And it's just more like a much more sort of integrated stadium. It almost looks like a campus building, as opposed to Ohio Stadium, which sort of like rises up in a way that you can't miss it. About 80,000 capacity for Notre Dame Stadium, so much smaller. And I'm not breaking news here, but I just want to make it clear that I'm the right person to be here for this. Because Notre Dame announced today that they're going to have wristbands on every seat in the stadium. And it's going to be one of those like wristband light shows where all these coordinated things happen during the game to celebrate Notre Dame plays. Like, it's going to be kind of cool. If you're an Ohio State fan, you're going to get a wristband on your seat. So I was talking to the guy about it. I said, oh, it's like Taylor Swift. And they said, actually, it's the same company that did the Jonas Brothers concert. And I said, I went to that Jonas Brothers concert. So I know exactly how these wristbands are going to work. It will be kind of cool.
That you are the perfect person to get us that information. I can't think of anybody else that should. By the way, has the Brian Kelly statue been finished yet, or is that in construction still?
Just his foot so far. It's going to take a while.
All right. From the football perspective, what was the vibe check around Marcus Freeman and the Irish, Doug?
Yeah, I think it's very clear here. It's so different for them. Week 1 a year ago, when it was Marcus Freeman's first game as the head coach, he coached the bowl game, but really they were a whole new program going into Ohio Stadium. And now they've played 4 games. So Marcus Freeman was talking about, they have a much better idea of who they are. And I did ask about, last year it's Tyler Buckner, a new starting quarterback for Notre Dame, and Ohio State's bringing back CJ Stroud. Now it's Sam Hartman in year 6 of college football as the Notre Dame quarterback, and Ohio State's coming in with Kyle McCord, who's making, his second start since he was officially named the starter. They acknowledge that. Like, they know that that's a very different vibe, and I think they just had, like, a lot of faith in Sam Hartman. Marcus Freeman admitted last year against Ohio State they just tried to sit on the ball and keep the ball out of Ohio State's hands. He said, we're not going to play not to lose this time. We're not going to huddle and just try to milk the clock. They're going to play offense with some purpose because they've definitely figured some things out. So like that vibe, there's much more confidence on the offensive side of the ball for Notre Dame compared to a year ago.
Doug, I know you don't spend a lot of time around Marcus Freeman. I know you did when he was around Ohio State, but not since he's been at Notre Dame. So maybe you can't really intuit this kind of thing. But like, so when Ryan Day talks, I think we have a pretty good vibe for how he's actually feeling about things. Doug, I know you don't know Marcus Freeman as well as you probably know Ryan Day or are able to pick up on vibes quite the same way. But when he tells you that they're not going to coach scared in this game, that they're going to be aggressive, like how did it land for you? Did it land like I buy it from this guy, or did it land like I'm just saying the thing I need to say because people were upset with how he played last year?
Yeah, I think they feel like they have a shot. Like it is not a chest puffed out kind of thing. Marcus Freeman's still learning the ropes here. He looks the same as he looked when he played at Ohio State. You know, I ran out after him and talked to him real quick, and I was just like, man, this is freaky. Because you don't look any different. It's been 15 years and you look like the same guy. So he's a young head coach. Like this is new for him. And, you know, there's some reporters asking in there, they're doing a green out for this game, right? That they're asking everybody to wear green. They're going to be doing the green with the wristbands. And there's people citing, hey, when you played Georgia, when you played Nebraska 20 years ago, and like he's not part of that. So it still does feel new. But it feels more like, to me, like at least we know who we are. We don't know if that means that'll beat Ohio State, but I think last year they sat on the ball because they weren't even sure they didn't know anything about themselves. And now, you know, they missed some tackles against Central Michigan. They weren't perfect, but they're not as confident as Ohio State. It's not that kind of vibe. It's not like a Ryan Day or Urban Meyer vibe where like you come in like, this is who we are. But I think compared to a year ago, they're a lot further down the path. So I think they do believe it, but we have to remember again, this is still a young coach in a program that's just getting started in a lot of ways.
Doug, what was the conversation, you know, like from not just what Sam Hartman may have said, but like what kind of questions was he getting from that local media contingent on Monday?
You know, it was interesting. He got some questions like, hey, you played in some big games before and lost. What are you going to do different here? And I was like, man, he was at Wake Forest. What are we doing here? He's a 60-year quarterback. He's started like 55 games, whatever it is. He's just in a much better position to succeed, I think, than Kyle McCord. So they were like, hey, like you lost to Wisconsin. He's like, man, I think Wake Forest and Wisconsin were each like 4-5 going into that game. Like, what are you talking about? That's not what this is. So, you know, someone mentioned that Jason Garrett on the Notre Dame broadcast last week, and I think he's terrible. Thank goodness it's not the Notre Dame announcers for this game. Was saying that he thinks Sam Hartman throws the deep ball as well as anybody in the country, and he sort of didn't go down that path. He sort of just said, hey, we got to have great receivers. We got to block it up. But he's just like kind of nonplussed. His beard is almost as dark and thick as Ryan Day's. Like he's a man, you know? So he just is almost sort of like, he almost felt like he was over it a little bit. Like if you're trying to get to Sam Hartman about like, hey, what does this mean? Or what does the experience matter? He was just sort of like, man, I don't know. Like I've done this before. So I just think like I don't think there's going to be something that's going to shake him. But, you know, there were a lot of questions about how good Ohio State's secondary is. So Notre Dame knows that too.
It's the Just for Men Bowl. I think we can call it that. Yeah. Nice.
Real. You can be part of it too, you guys. Look at you. I feel naked with no beard here. Not a beard talk.
Doug, I want to ask you.
Grow one. You got to grow one by Saturday.
Yeah,
That's
grow one out. Yeah.
No.
Doug, I want to ask you basically the same thing that Austin just asked you about Sam Hartman. Like, what were the local media asking Marcus Freeman about this game?
Yeah, so they were asking about sort of how you handle the playmakers, right, for Ohio State. What do you do with Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka? And he was just sort of like, they're really good. They were asking, somebody was like, hey, you're getting ready for two quarterbacks? And Marcus Freeman was kind of like, you know, they named Kyle McCord the starter. Like, what are we doing here? So he did think, I asked Marcus Freeman, and this is like, I think a theme here that maybe they don't get asked about it now because they've been talking about it for a month, about how good that offensive line is and what that allows you to do, right? When you believe in your offensive line this much, the way you can run the ball, the way you can hit, you know, play action passes down the field. And Marcus said, you know, my first news conference here, I said we were going to be a program defined by the offensive line and the defensive line. I don't know if they're there on the defensive line. There was a Javonte Jean-Baptiste question about like what this means. And it's like, I don't know. Is he going to come out and have 6 sacks because he played for Ohio State last year? Marcus didn't really go there either. But I do think they know they have something with this offensive line, but he also got asked about JT Tuimoloau, and then somebody asked me how to pronounce it because they called him 44 in the question. I was like, that's okay. There's people on the Ohio State beat who still don't know how to pronounce it. So, Marcus was saying, like, listen, man, they got some dudes on the defensive line. So, but I do think I'm very curious about their offensive line. I think it's so good at this point that it's just the norm here, right? I think they accept it as a given that they believe in Joe Alt and what these offensive linemen can do.
So wait, they're like, hold on, stop. Is there anyone who's lived in Columbus here who knows how to pronounce? Hey, you, new guy. How do you pronounce it? They stopped the press conference so that you could do that?
I didn't. I would have been happy to do that. But they asked me afterward because the guy tried to ask me and I was like, hey, I got to go say hi to Marcus first. But then he asked me later. So there is a piece of news. It's JD Bertrand, right? Their good linebacker. I think has been out with a concussion. He's expected to play. So they did run through like an injury list with Marcus. And I think like the 5 names that came up, 4 of the 5 are expected back this week.
He answered the question?
He did. Like Eric Hansen, who is an Ohio native and who's been covering Notre Dame for a really long time, I guess must ask it every week. But he went through player by player. Are they going to play? And Marcus went, yes, yes. If he practices well, yes, no, yes. And I was like, this is wonderful.
Holy cow.
Wow. I thought that was illegal.
Yeah,
Apparently
I guess he's still too young as a coach to realize that maybe he doesn't have to do that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Doug, I had 2 questions. Were there any other Ohio State media there? And 2, did Marcus remember you?
Yeah, no other Ohio State media, although I know people I think were live tweeting it off their camera feed, which is fine. So, no other Ohio State media. About, I think, 7 digital and newspapers represented covering Notre Dame and 3 TV stations. And come on, man. I mean, I'm not Tim May, but I've been around. Marcus knows what's up. I did a huge story with Marcus when he was finishing up at Ohio State when he was back as a grad assistant about his desire to be an athletic director down the line. And he had done some like internship stuff with Gene Smith. And I just thought like Marcus is a really smart kind of big picture thinker. I really thought he was maybe going to go that way because Gene Smith was that. Gene Smith played college football and then didn't go into coaching. Gene was a grad assistant at Notre Dame. And so I said to Marcus, man, I thought we'd be here. Gene Smith is retiring. You'd be like the next candidate up to be the next AD at Ohio State. But he loves ball too much. He loves ball. So he said he has I guess I wrote a story when he went to Kent State when he was 24 to be a full-time assistant for the first time. And he said, man, I still have your story. And it made me feel old.
Well, at least you got to go enjoy a more low-key affair at Notre Dame on a Monday. And then later on today, Tuesday, Doug, you get to come right back into the circus. So
yeah, it's an interesting contrast for sure.
Hurry home to us, okay?
I will.
We're gonna let Doug, because Doug's got to be here at the Woody in a couple hours. We're gonna let him get on the road right now. So, we tried this. I think it worked, and we got some insight from Doug, and we're gonna let him go.
All right, see you guys.
See ya.
All right, back with just Bill Landis and Austin Ward. Bill, imagine if like all the questions that we kicked around on a Tuesday episode of the Podcast Daily, like you actually got to ask them all. Sounds like you could do that at Notre Dame. Like that must be wonderful.
I cannot, like, I figured it's a smaller number, right, than what Ohio State has. I assume every beat's a smaller number. I can't believe it was only 18 people in that room. There's going to be like 70 in the room for Ryan Day later today.
Yeah. And I mean, I know that the schedule is loaded on Saturday for college football. This is the best game in the country.
Yeah.
Like, and to me, it's not even close. Like, I would have thought there'd be not just, one person from our beat, but also national reporters flocking in there, spending all week getting ready, doing back and forth, Columbus, South Bend. Evidently not, but I know that there will be plenty of intrigue in the Woody. Ryan Day and Jim Knowles later coming up. We'll stream that on the podcast. We've got into some of Bill's questions. What else is on your mind?
Yeah, just like a vibe check maybe on the offensive line and how Ryan Day feels about that group after 3 games. And it's hard for me, I think, to get a good evaluation on them because I think you've seen steady progress, but also you've seen, I think, the opponent get worse and worse every week as well. Like, what does it mean that they were able to push around a Western Kentucky defense that, like as Berm said, was sometimes putting 2 guys on the line of scrimmage? Like, I don't know. I think there's value in gaining confidence and just getting those reps and keep building the rapport and the communication and stuff like that. But I feel like it's still a pretty big unknown, and like, not that Ryan Day will express it in those terms, but he's been fairly critical of that position group, I think, prior to last week. So I want to hear what he thinks of them now that they have to go on the road, where it will most likely be a fairly hostile environment. I think communication will be difficult, at least early on in the game. What's his confidence level on their ability to handle all that?
Yeah, I thought that they took a step forward on Saturday, but again, it's who did they do it against? You said all last week. You brought up all the rushing defense stats for Western Kentucky. Like, there was going to be opportunity for them to play better. There's value in doing that against any opponent. I'm not going to shortchange that. They got rid of, some of the holding penalties. There was still a false start call on Josh Simmons that you have to be on alert for that this week because of the noise and communication that you alluded to there, Bill. So that's like, there are things about it aside from just playing a better team and a better coach team that are going to be instructive. Like, winning and losing the game is going to be all that matters. However you do that, that's great. But I don't know that Ohio State can win without both lines playing and taking another step forward. Even if they did do that on Saturday against Western Kentucky, this is a different task entirely.
Yeah, especially for the defensive line. As Doug said, like, this is the Notre Dame offensive line is like the front porch of the program, basically. Like, that is the thing that they do best. So that's a really intriguing matchup, and maybe that's more of a question for Jim Knowles than Ryan Day. Like, how do you go about attacking a team who is so stout on the line, especially at the tackle position? Like, Joe Alt and Blake Fisher are All-American caliber tackles in my mind. Like, I think both probably future first-round picks, and I know that Ohio State feels pretty good about their defensive ends too, and people want to see more production from that group. I'm there with you. I thought Jack and JT played their best game of the year last week against probably some overmatched offensive linemen. This is a different beast entirely. So, like, you need everybody firing on all cylinders, right? You need everybody's A game, I think, to go to South Bend, but I think they really need it from the defensive line and particularly the ends in that kind of matchup. So I would like to know how Jim Knowles feels about that group. He was asked a little bit about them last week. Probably got a little bit better of an evaluation on them in the Western Kentucky game when they did seem to get after the quarterback pretty well, but how much of that does he think can carry over when the talent on the opposing offensive line just gets amplified by, 10-fold, 20-fold? Like, this is a way different test.
Yeah, I know you and Berm got into this, with the rewatch, and we've talked so much ad nauseum about the defensive line. Like, it's great that they got success when it was a 2-3 touchdown lead, and Western Kentucky, who was already going to throw, had to throw it even more. Like, pin your ears back and go. There were signs that progress was coming. Just like the first quarter still felt like a little sluggish to me, and I shouldn't, I can let that go. I'm focusing on the small sample size when there's also some positives that I could look at as the game went on. I acknowledge them, but like, I'd like to see them establish that sort of high level havoc causing presence early on, right from the jump. Like, this, I thought everybody else played with a lot of energy, and I'm not excluding the defensive line from this. I thought the team played with a lot of juice, and the way that they came out, they were going to run away with it from every phase right off the jump. And I shouldn't be as concerned about the defensive line, maybe not doing that in the first quarter as I am, but when you partner that with not just the first 2 weeks of the season, but what happened last year and maybe even another season before that, I just can't get it out of my brain. And if you have Notre Dame's offensive line out there to make it difficult as well, like, that's a lot of stress on a secondary that is much better. But for however high of a ceiling I think Sam Hartman may have in the NFL, if he has time to throw, like, he's going to make plays. That's going to happen. Like,
yep.
It's an obvious, it's an obvious part of college football that you have to rush the passer with your front four if you're going to win a national championship. And like, this is a week. I'm not saying that they will or won't. I think that this is just a week that those rushmen are going to have to prove it.
I agree. And like, obviously the tackles have a huge say in that, right? They're the one who are quite literally trying to stop you from getting there. But Sam Hartman is going to hold on to the ball for a long time. It's what he's done his entire career. He is not afraid to get hit. He'll get hit as he delivers the ball. So and they're not excuses. I think they're real explanations for why Ohio State doesn't have sacks. Though the other team gets the ball out quick, 1 step drop, 1.5 step, and the ball's out. Like you might see some of that from Sam Hartman, but I don't think you're going to see a whole lot of it. He wants to push the ball down the field, and he'll hold on to that thing for 3 seconds if he has to do it. So the opportunity should be there, provided that Ohio State's defensive line can win some one-on-ones. It's a tough matchup for the ends. I think maybe it's a little more favorable on the interior for a guy like Mike Hall against the guards and centers for Notre Dame, who like they're good, but they're probably a notch below the 2 tackles. So we saw Mike have a big game last year. So I think they all need to get after it. But this game definitely does put the defensive ends in a probably as big of a spotlight as they've been under Jim Knowles.
Yeah. What else? Anything?
Yeah, the one more thing to go back to what I was talking about at the beginning of the show with Ryan Day and like his mentality for this game. I would like to revisit some of the stuff he said about CJ Stroud in the 2021 Oregon game and the feeling that they put too much on his shoulders to try to go win that game, and just how that informs how he's going into this one. It's a little different because this is Kyle's technically his 5th career start, but his 4th start of the season, not the second game. I do think they have a better grasp of who they are offensively going into this game than they probably did going into that Oregon game. Maybe that's an addendum to the question, like, do they actually feel that way? Because I think they're starting to figure that kind of stuff out. But what's the balance there between, giving your quarterback the confidence that you believe in him, that you think he can go make plays, without putting it all on him, like it's do or die on the quarterback's shoulder, like it did feel in that Oregon game back in 2021, where CJ played quite well. He just, he couldn't make a throw or two in that final drive. Are they aware of trying to avoid a similar situation going to South Bend?
Yeah. Well, will that question be answered later on Tuesday? Mm-hmm. We'll see. Probably. I think Ryan Day's been giving a lot of insight and a lot of valid insight and reality about what's been going on with the quarterbacks throughout camp. So I would hope and expect that will continue, but we'll find out later on. Ryan Day and Jim Knowles will be on the microphone in the Woody at noon. We will have that stream for you on the podcast, and then we'll be back with some Snappy Jays, and then we'll have the podcast daily tomorrow for you all as we get ready for more access with the Buckeyes and getting ready for Saturday night, the big one, Ohio State at Notre Dame. Thanks for spending part of your Tuesday here with us to get it rolling. That's Bill Landis, and I'm Austin Ward, and we will talk to you later.